tell me what to do.
Hey, here we go.
To make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.
Yeah, let's make those Lunker Lake dreams come true. Hello, everybody. Bob Luz, the Pond Boss, coming at you live from the balmy hills of Gordonville, Texas. Saying balmy is like 94 degrees. Humidity is way on up there, and it's kind of like that everywhere else. I've talked to my good friend Bucky Lanehart up in upstate New York. Look at there. There's Gene and Barbara Saunders checking in already. Good to see you guys. And it's been in the 90s in upstate New York, so I'm pretty confident you folks are seeing all kinds of summer weather. Looks like Todd Austin, and here we are, July the 8th. It is summertime. So let's see here. I'm going to call this up so I can see who all's checking in. Todd Austin's got the game going on. He knows what to do here. Says we're showing 15 people, but I don't even know of 2 of you that are on here. So let's see here. Let me look here, because I like to tell everybody howdy. Looks like Kim Moore's checking in. Okay, you guys that have seen this show before, it's hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comment section. Click like and share this video to your timeline on Facebook, and you're eligible for drawing for a Pond Boss hat. There it is right there in living color. And a Pond Boss mug that knows how to. Jacob West isn't on here yet. There's Mike Cottrell. Look at there. Danny Tolliver checking in from Bells, Texas. Hadn't seen you in a while, Danny. But this mug knows how to, and if Jacob West was here, he'd be saying it out loud. Knows how to keep hot things hot and cold things cold. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the timeline. Click like, share it, and you're eligible for a drawing. And we'll have a drawing here in another week or so, whenever Leanne tells me to. There's Michael Gray. I'm sure he's sitting in the air-conditioned cab of a trackhoe somewhere, either digging up some dirt or whacking some rock with a hammer. Jack Hamilton from Indiana. Michael Gray's from Tennessee. So we've already got a pretty good representation of folks from around the country. I thought tonight I'd talk about non-productive ponds. I see Ashton Chandler. No, Adam Chandler. Adam, good to see you, Adam. Good to see you. Chance Burns is checking in from Andalusia, Alabama. Chance, good to see you, buddy. Got to meet Kevin Rhodes earlier this week. He's from over there in that neck of the woods. Electrofished the lake in Belzoni, Mississippi, day before yesterday. So let's talk about non-productive ponds. That's kind of a really interesting thing. When you start talking to hey Michael, Eric, how's everything in Iowa? Good to see you, buddy. When you start talking about non-productive ponds and you're talking to an angler, what that means to an angler is they just can't catch many fish or can't catch any good fish, can't catch any quality fish. When you start talking to somebody in the pond management business, an unproductive pond is a pond that can't produce more fish or could produce more but isn't. I evaluated a lake here, I don't know, a month or so ago. I'll tell you about it here in a minute. Harrison Davis, good to see Harrison from Georgia. Chuck Brinkman checking in from Missouri. Let me do a little commercial first. I don't want to talk about unproductive ponds. Chuck Brinkman doesn't have an unproductive pond. Here it is. Here's the new issue of Pond Boss. Look at that. Brand new. Pond treatment gone bad. We changed the layout. We've added some content. We got some pretty good stuff. Look at there. Here's Michael Gray's article right there. Michael's looking at us right now. He's one of our regular contributors, Earth Mover. Here's one about leeches. You got leeches? Here's one, Dr. Wes Neal. I talked to Dr. Neal yesterday on the phone for a little bit. He wrote an article, this issue about should you have your own electrofishing boat. He's kind of against it, which kind of makes sense because we got to figure out why we'd want one and what we're going to do with it. There's Matt Rail checking in. If you guys don't know Matt, you haven't friended him yet, you need to. He's got a really, really outstanding website and Facebook page on pond management as well. I've known Matt for a long, long time, since way back when he worked for Aquatic Ecosystems. A little slip of the tongue there. Hey, there's Wayne. Look at Wayne. Good to see Wayne. Wayne and Josie. This is their Wednesday night date night. I just love that. Travis Paul Smith checking in. Travis, gosh, dog it. You know what? I meant to send that email. I promise you I'll do that when I leave here. As soon as I left last Wednesday, I got a phone call, and it kept me. I was on the phone all the way home, and then my wife had something to do. So anyway, I got all kinds of cool excuses, but I will handle that today. Zach Bollinger checking in from up around Pennsylvania. But anyway, if you guys have not subscribed to Pond Boss Magazine, I want to encourage you to do it. This is the go-to document, go-to magazine, go-to serial, go-to authority for all things pond and lake. And we've got at pondboss.com, you can subscribe. We've got a discussion forum that's been there, golly, since, I think the one we got now has been there since 2002. And got over 500,000 posts, so there's a lot of topics there. So anyway, $35 a year. You guys that watch this show often, you know what I'm going to say next. $35 a year, cheaper than a Friday night date, and lasts a year where that date's gone. There's Danny Mac checking in with his bride. All right, good times for now. All right. Oh, Travis did get his package. Yay! Woohoo! Maybe we did send that email. And I just didn't know it. Maybe I did it and I forgot. I'm kind of getting to that age. Hey, Scott McClurg's checking in from Lincoln, Nebraska, watching with his daughter. Hey, Reagan. Shout out to Reagan McClurg. Glad to see Reagan on here with her daddy, Scott. Scott's a pretty good pond management guy. He likes to fish. Hope you do too, Reagan. So let's talk about non-productive or unproductive ponds. I evaluated a pond about a month ago, or actually it's a lake, probably 7 or 8 acres. And we shocked up some really nice bass. Now, when we evaluate a lake with an electrofishing boat, we're looking at a number of things. Here's what we're looking at. We're looking at what we call the catch per unit of effort. So in other words, we've got a timer on the boat that when the switch is engaged and we're putting electricity in water, that tells us how long we're actually putting electricity in water. So then we figure out how much time we've spent and compare that to our catch rates on the different species of fish, primarily largemouth bass. You know, Zach says, okay, let me back up here just a minute. I don't want to get real far behind. Danny Mac, I want more of those shirts you gave us. Where to buy? Do you have some to sell? You know what? Let me talk to Leanne. We probably do. I think we can round one of those up. When Zach goes out, he and his wife go to nice places. It's $80, so you could buy a subscription for a friend and not go out. Of course, you need to talk to your wife about that. Dustin Crawley from Chattanooga, Tennessee. There's Troy Todd, Dion Myers. So anyway, when we're evaluating a lake, we're looking at the catch per unit of effort. We call that CPUE. And if you look online, you can see what that actually is. And so we're counting the number of quality bass. Quality, believe it or not, for science, for biology, a quality bass is 12 inches or bigger. And then we're also counting how many bass are like 16 and bigger. So we're comparing our catch rates electrofishing from lake to lake to lake to lake. For example, in most trophy bass lakes, we're looking at catch rates from with the electrofishing boat that may range from 25 to 45 bass per hour of electrofishing. And so that's trophy bass. Now, for a pretty well-balanced lake, that catch rate might be 50 to 75 bass per hour. But you get much above 70, 75 bass per hour, that's a crowded bass lake. So there's Chris Yvetta. Hey, Chris, I know you want to talk, and I'm game for it. Just ring me when you're ready. I'm back home. Frank James. Hey, Bob. Hey, Frank. So when we start talking about catch per unit of effort, that's one of the criteria we look at to see how productive a pond is. The next thing we look at are lengths and weights. So we weigh and measure every fish we catch. Now, I'm talking about largemouth bass and bigger sunfish, catfish, bluegill, fish like that. On the smaller sunfish and small bass, we don't weigh those, but we categorize them according to their length. So the second thing we look at are relative weights. So what are the weights of these fish compared to what standards are? For example, we know a 10-inch bass should weigh 10 ounces. A 12-inch bass should weigh 12 ounces. 14-inch bass should weigh 1 pound 7 ounces. If y'all are writing this down, this is pretty good stuff. 14-inch bass, 1 pound 7 ounces. 16-inch bass, 2 1/4. 18-inch bass should weigh 3 1/4. How do those numbers compare to the fish that we're capturing randomly with an electrofishing boat? So we're looking at those weights. You know, are they like a long distance runner, or like what Ray Scott says? Ray Scott called me today. I got to visit with him today for a few minutes. But what Ray says is like an Alabama deputy sheriff. So what do your bass look like? Are they big, deep, wide fish, or are they thin? So we're looking at catch per unit of effort with the electrofishing boat. We're looking at relative weights. We're looking at ratios. So in other words, if we catch 5 size classes of bass, 7 size classes of bluegills. So if we catch a lot of 1-inch bluegills and some 2 to 4 inchers, some 4 to 5s, some 5 to 7s, 7 to 9s, and a few bigger than 9, we count those fish and we compare the ratios. And then we figure out the dynamics of that fishery. But this fishery that I looked at, let's see here, let's see here. I see Warren Blesh. Hey, Warren, good to see you. David Schneiderman, Tom Blasdell. Remember, guys, now Chris Chavetta, who's on here with us, lives in St. Louis, but he manages hundreds of acres of water out at Innsbruck, which is a development out west of St. Louis where there's a lot of primary homes and a bunch of second homes out there. Frank James lives in Louisiana, has a pond in East Texas. David Schneiderman, remember, is our Easy Dock guy. So if you're looking for a floating dock, you need to talk to David. Brooke and Tammy Spurgeon, they know what to do with this hashtag Pond Boss Magazine. Let's see here. Zach Bollinger said, do those numbers differ from north or south of waters? No, they do not. Let's see. No, they don't. Those numbers are the same all over the nation. Now, what will happen is you'll see, like in Iowa and along the Mason-Dixon line moving north, you see more underweight bass, but that's more a function of the dynamics of that fishery. It's a function of how much food they can produce. There's Steve Alexander checking in. I see Steve. Let's see. Virginia Shields Fisher. Do you have advice for a pond that will not hold water? Yes. Mow it. Oh, that was bad. I'm so sorry. Virginia. Let me circle back on that one here in a minute. Yeah, I do have advice for that. Going back to Michael's question, or Zach's question, yeah, those numbers do not differ. Those numbers come from actually 300,000 bass that were weighed and measured over about a 20-year period from Dr. Richard Anderson, Dr. Dick Anderson, who's still alive. He's 91 now. And I meant to call him today, but I'm going to ring his number and just catch up with him a little bit. He's hunkered down in Houston, but he worked in Missouri for a long time and had several real special research projects, and one of those was to calculate relative weights. So he looked at 300,000 fish, he and his students and helpers over a 15 to 20 year period, and he's the one that came up with those numbers. So those numbers apply nationwide. Well, now you like this lake, for example, here's where it gets a little tricky, a little complicated. Our CPUE for this particular lake was 28 bass per hour, which is about a trophy bass fishery number. Relative weights of the bass were under 100 post-spawn, all of them. Most of the fish were from 88 to 92% relative weight. That's not exactly trophy quality fish that are overweight. We saw two size classes of bluegill, which suggests that the bluegill are overeaten in the food chain. So we saw a low catch. So here's the puzzle. We saw a low CPUE. Relative weights were low, which you'd think with a low catch per unit of effort that these fish would be fat, but they weren't. And the bluegill numbers were fairly low. Now, there was very little habitat to harbor small bait fish. We saw some small bluegills right against the edge in limited amounts of vegetation that's growing out from the edge of this lake. But the lake was almost like a big bowl. So it really was not a productive lake. So we had to come to the conclusion as to what to tell this landowner. So the first thing we do is look at water chemistry. Water chemistry for that lake was great. So I'm going to greet a few people and I'm going to come back to the topic. Let me see here. I see Jeremy Duckworth. I don't know why my thing's not scrolling here on my laptop. Warren Blesh works with our good buddy Stephen Barton. Warren's got some property down there in the hill country of Texas. Does some really good pond management stuff down there. Good to see him. So, heck, I'm just going to look at my phone. Jeremy Duckworth. Good to see Jeremy. Jacob West. Drove by the international headquarters of Pond Boss. Coming and going today, did you? Well, I wasn't here. I wasn't far, but I wasn't here. Let's see here. Harrison Davis. Good. Okay, all right. I'm caught up now. So now let's go back to the topic at hand. So now when we see low catch rates, relative weights are fairly low, bluegill are definitely overeaten. There were some red ear sunfish in there. Water chemistry was great. Habitat was minimal. What's the conclusion you can come to? I'm listening. Yep, that's right. That's a low producing lake. So I get excited when I come across lakes like that because I know a lake that size with good water chemistry could support 4 times the amount of mass of fish that it has. So how do you do that? Let's talk about that. You have to increase the productivity. Now, like I said early on when I first started this show, when people start talking about productivity, anglers are thinking, wow, I can go out and I can catch 10 fish in an afternoon. That's not real productive compared to that lake up the road where I catch 25 bass. That's more productive. When you talk to a fisheries biologist, now Steve Alexander, productivity is a big deal to him because he's private waters fishing. If you guys don't know about that, check him out. I know he's been spending some time on a lake that I've helped develop over the last 10 or 12 years over there near Clarksville, Texas. That's a highly productive lake. That landowner over there, Kenny Backus, who sometimes checks in on this show, has spent a lot of time and a lot of money to have I remember when he built the lake, I stocked it and coached him on managing it, helped him manage it. Now he's kind of tight. He's a tight wad. I've said that to his face, so I don't mind saying it behind his back. If he can squeeze a nickel out of you, he will. And if he can do it himself, he will. But one thing that Kenny figured out was that the timing of his fertilization program was a big deal, because if he missed it, then he saw productivity in his lake lag, and you see a lot of his fertilizer get bound up in coontail or other aquatic plants. So here's where I'm going. There's ways to take non-productive or low-producing lakes and ponds and then turn them into a higher-producing lake with better fisheries, better fishing. Now, I think that's part of our job. So you hear me preaching a whole bunch of stuff, over time. Joe Marlowe, hi Bob, do muck socks really work on the muck? I don't know what a muck sock is, so describe to me what a muck sock is. I don't know what that is. If it's a bacterial product, microbes, there's some microbes out there that work. Most ponds have the microbes they need if they have the food to eat and they can get a little bit of oxygen. So I'm not sure tell me what a muck sock is. You had that question after the show last week, and I took a couple of minutes and looked for it, and I couldn't find what a muck sock was other than something that you put under a muck boot. So Joe says yes. If it's microbes, if the muck is made up of organic matter, then you can break that organic matter down, get it to release its nutrients into the water, and then be able to flush them out, which increases the volume of water. So if we're talking about microbes, beneficial microbes, they can have a positive impact on a eutrophic lake, but they're not necessarily going to increase the volume and decrease the amount of silt. If the silt is made up of dirt or fine clay or any kind of rock, soil-based fine particles, muck socks aren't going to do a thing. But if you've got a whole bunch of organic matter that needs to be composted, they work pretty well. Okay, so if it's okay, well, I see what you're saying. Socks you put in the pond, yes. So if it's microbes and you've got aeration, it will work. Now, if you don't have aeration, it might work a little bit, but then, okay, here's the way that works. Microbes need something to attach to, and they need food, and they need oxygen for the most part, okay? There's some anaerobic bacteria, but these work best where they have oxygen. So the interface between the water and the silt, if there's oxygen there, then the muck socks bacteria will work great. And it will act like a little Pac-Man, and they'll eat that organic matter, process it, compost it, let it release its nutrients into the water where that stuff can be utilized by Mother Nature. So now I'm going to tie that back in to a productive pond. A productive pond is one that has the food chain that's complete. So when we start talking in pond management about fertilizing water in the spring, now I always have a qualifying statement. You guys in the North Country, and North meaning, say, middle Kansas through, going east through Iowa, all the way almost to the Carolinas and north of there, you probably don't want to fertilize a pond unless you really know what you're doing, where you can manage your plankton blooms, because you're going to be dealing with ice on your ponds. So where I'm going, Danny Mack said the microbes also convert the organics into the most basic compounds or lost to CO2. So what happens? Yeah, he's right. So let me give a little detail on that. So what happens with microbes is, as they consume these organic pieces of grass, clippings, fish waste, dead plankton, whatever it is, they break it down, they convert it, they convert some to gas, they convert some to organics, some to basic nutrients like phosphate, nitrates, basic calcium. And a lot of that stuff can be dissolved into the water, as well as the CO2 gas. The CO2 gas gets dispensed or disposed of through the water column, either through photosynthesis or it just evacuates to the atmosphere and goes all through there. So when we start talking about productivity, if a pond can produce its own food chain, then it's going to transfer up that food chain. Now, one thing about the food web that you need to know, every level of the food chain, the conversion rate is about 10 to 1. So in the southern tier states, we love to see a plankton bloom in the springtime. And there's two reasons we want to see that plankton bloom. Number one is when the baby fish are first hatched. I don't care if it's threadfin shad, fathead minnows, largemouth bass, bluegill, crappie, channel cat, whatever. When they're first hatched, the only nutrition they've got is the yolk of the egg that they were. And when they absorb that yolk, they have no body fat, they have no energy. They have the mouth about 1/10 the size of a straight pin head. So tiny little bitty mouth. So they've got to eat. Well, most of them filter their food from the water. So they'll filter plankton, which microscopic pieces of algae, to get the energy they need to begin to store a little bit of fat so that they can survive. If they don't have food for 45 minutes or an hour after they absorb that yolk, then they're going to die. They're going to starve to death, because they got to have the energy from the food that they can consume. So part of our job in a productive pond or lake is to produce that base of the food chain. So when we make sure we've got some fertility, and microbes add to that. Microbes convert stuff that otherwise would be bound in the mud or laying on the bottom and not be used. And the microbes can convert it, regurgitate it back up into the water column, which feeds that microscopic plankton and life like that. So what happens is as the microscopic algae begins to grow in the spring, little bitty bugs start to feed on it. You'll see amoebas. Well, you won't see them because they're microscopic. Parameciums, amoebas, the stuff you learned about in high school biology, which in turn feeds the zooplankton, which can be anything from rotifers to daphnia. I mean, if when I go see a pond full of daphnia, I'm in heaven, because that kind of food there, you can see daphnia. They're little bitty bugs about so big, and they look like little fleas underwater, white little fleas, and boy, they're just all over the place. When they've got what they need to eat, which when your baby fish can feed on that, and insects can feed on that, I mean, dragonfly nymphs will feed on that. So now you've got the base of the food chain with plankton converting 10 to 1 to the next level, which is going to be insects and zooplankton, which is next level is going to be converting to fish, small fish, which is going to convert to medium-sized fish, crustaceans, things like that, and then on up the food web to the very top. So for a bass to gain a pound, it's got to eat 10 pounds of bait fish that ate 10 pounds or 100 pounds of their food, that ate 1,000 pounds of their food. So the way we increase productivity in a pond is to make sure that the water's happy, that we've got good chemistry. Good chemistry in a pond focuses mostly on alkalinity. We really need alkalinity, 40 parts per million up to about 150 parts per million. If we've got alkalinity, which is calcium carbonate, then that kind of water can grow the plankton we need, that can grow the zooplankton that we need, that can grow the insects and tiny fish that we need, that can grow the bigger fish and bigger insects and crawfish and things that we need, that can feed the bigger fish on up that food chain. So that's partly how we take a pond and make it more productive. Another way, we can bypass some of that food chain with fish foods. Today's fish foods are so complete, nutritious, that you can bypass some of the food chain just with fish food. Now, here's the caveat there. Not all fish eat fish food. You know, bluegill will eat fish food, red ear won't. Channel cat will eat fish food, largemouth bass won't, unless they're feed trained. Crappie won't, red ear sunfish won't, threadfin shad will. You know, so their fathead minnows will, golden shiners will. So there's some fish that will eat fish food, so you can bypass some of what nature would offer by offering fish food. And that's what Chuck Brinkman does. Chuck offers fish food to all different sizes of his fish out there west of St. Louis. So let me see here. We got some things chiming in here. Let me see here. Harrison Davis says, all of a sudden I caught a bunch of bass between 8 and 11 inches and no bass 12 inches or bigger. I've never seen that before in my 2-acre pond. My guess is some people caught and removed a bunch of the larger bass, causing a small bass boom. Here's what happens. Now, you guys need to hear this. It took me a long time to figure out some of what I'm fixing to tell you. So, as I sip on this Coke and whatever's with it, I think it's TX blend today. What happens in a pond where the bass are crowded? My guess is some people caught and removed a bunch of the larger bass, causing a small... Okay, here's what I want to tell you. Nature won't allow a vacuum. So if something's missing in your pond, nature's going to do what it can to fill the void. Now, something else is going to happen when you push your pond and it's becoming overproductive. Nature's going to push back on that as well. And I've seen that happen over and over. I really first started seeing it at Richmond Mill Lake back in about 2005. And I saw it in upstate New York in 2004. So what I started seeing was, as we took these low-producing lakes and started pushing them to their potential and then pushed them above normal, nature wanted to push back. And nature pushes back in several ways. One way that nature pushes back is by allowing the water quality to deteriorate. That's one way. So we can counteract that by being sure that our alkalinity is right, so the water can buffer itself against big changes. We can aerate, and move the water to allow it to release gases and absorb gases to stabilize it. Another way that nature pushes back is if you end up with a bounty, something wants to harvest it. Whether it's, back in the day, it was all we worried about were cormorants, water turkeys. Now, we didn't even worry about those in the 80s. Their resurgence happened in the 80s and in the 90s, and then the numbers leveled off because we were able to cull some, and other predatory birds, snakes. But now our number one nemesis in small pond management are river otters. If a pair of river otters comes and they find out that you've got an 8-acre lake where you've zeroed in on your bass and you've grown a bunch of 3 to 5 pound bass and a handful of bigger fish, they're going to want to relieve that lake of those fish. So we've got to be vigilant, paying attention to what wants to take advantage of us. So when you get that pond producing more than what it could or should, be ready for a pushback. So that's one of the things. So now going back to Harrison's question, all of a sudden I caught a bunch of bass between 8 and 11 inches and no bass 12 inches or bigger. I've never seen that before in my 2-acre pond. My guess is some people well, if it's your pond, I wonder who those people are. A 2-acre pond, just kind of just a general rule of thumb on a pond that is a normally productive pond, which whatever that means, normal, I don't know what normal means anymore. We had a normal life until about the middle of March, so I don't know what normal means. But in a normal pond, you're going to produce somewhere to the tune of, I'm going to say, 50 to 75 pounds of bass per acre. Well, what that means is that that's about what the pond can produce and support. So once those numbers of bass get to a certain level, so in other words, you got a food chain going on. Here's your bass, here's your food chain. You got a good food chain, the bass catch up with it, then the bass mass goes up, the forage numbers go down, then the biomass of the bass drops. And it's going to level off around 50 to 75 pounds per acre. That's why it's important to be checking relative weights. So if you're catching a bunch of 8 to 11 inch bass and not any bass any bigger than that, and they're underweight, out they come. start culling some bass. Now, I'd be selective. If you catch one that looks like a football, throw it back. Now where I was going to go with this, nature doesn't allow a vacuum or a void. If somebody goes in and catches a bunch of bass and over-harvests a pond, which a 2-acre pond, that could happen. All you got to do is catch 100 bass out of a 2-acre pond, you've over-harvested it. That's way too many fish. They're gone. So nature's going to make up for that void. If you go from 50 pounds of bass to 20 pounds of bass per acre, nature's going to want to fill that void back up to 50, but it doesn't know how many numbers. So what's going to happen, there's going to be a foot race amongst little bitty bass. So those little bitty bass are going to grow up and try to get up and fill that missing void. And if they can, they will. But what typically happens is you have so many mouths to feed that they overeat the food chain. I was talking to my son Jonathan today. He's got his little 1-acre pond that's starting to produce some fish. We've had it, I think we stocked it with bluegills in November and stocked fathead minnows in it this spring. He's waiting for the food chain to build, and he's one of these guys that kind of likes to get things done now. He's a mover shaker, kind of get it done. He said, Dad, if you really don't have time to do this, I can order some fish. I said, no. What we're waiting on is for your pond to become productive enough, because you're feeding the fish, you got some fertility, you just got to give it time to build the food chain to support bass long term in that 1-acre hole of water. So what's going to happen with Harrison's pond is when you catch a bunch of bass between 8 and 11 inches, you probably need to, I don't like the word probably, you need to be culling some bass. Now what's kind of cool is if those 8 to 11 inch bass are this year's fish, cull 8 inchers. Look at those 11 inchers. If they're chunky and fat, preserve some of them because they're trying to fill the void of fish that are missing. Okay, so Harrison also saw a bunch of 6-inch bass, which you've never seen. 6-inch bass are probably this year's hatch, but so could 8-inch bass be. And where you are in Georgia, if those 11-inch bass have relative weights greater than 100, they could have been your first spawn bass. Now, odds are they're not, so you really need to be weighing and measuring some of those. So Brad Folt says, what ratio of green ears to regular sunfish is recommended in a bass pond? I'm going to interpret that question to mean what ratio of red ear sunfish to bluegill sunfish is recommended in a bass pond. When you first stock a pond, Brad, you want, and it depends on your goals, you're going to stock somewhere between 500 and 1,000 bluegill per acre. And if you really want to ramp up, you'll stock 2,000 bluegill fingerlings per acre. Now, in this day and time, we do custom stocking management strategies. So if I'm talking to a guy that's in his late 60s and he doesn't buy green bananas because he doesn't want to wait for them to get ripe, we're probably going to stock bigger numbers. If you're in your late 20s, early 30s, and you got time, we'll stock lower numbers and just give them time to develop. So the ratio of red ear, I'm going to assume you mean red ear sunfish to bluegills, and we'll stock 1,000 bluegills per acre and 250 red ear sunfish per acre. Now that's a pretty standard stocking if we want to build a really good food chain where we can stock bass within the next 6 months. David Harris, is it too late to add crawfish to a pond in Georgia? No, it's not too late to stock them. It's probably too late to get them. If the suppliers are out, then it's too late. I don't think it's ever too late to stock crawfish. The problem is that it's transporting crawfish in the heat is hard on them because you don't really want to ice them down and get them from hot lakes and put ice on them and put them back into a hot lake. But odds are high that the availability is low. Brian McGuire knows zero. Hey, you guys, it's a little after 7. Let me do a little commercial here. Pond Boss Magazine, $35 a year. Enough said. And I've been watching orders coming across online, and I know there's been 4 or 5 of you guys order subscriptions to Pond Boss. Thank you for that, because this is the economy that helps fuel this show. That, and along with our sponsors, David Schneiderman with Easy Dock. We appreciate his sponsorship, as well as Texas Hunter Feeders. I love Texas Hunter Feeders. They're so responsive, great products. They're expensive. Well, they're really not, because when you buy one, 10 years down the road, you're still going to have it, and that works out to be about $80 or $90 a year for your feeder. It's a great feeders, and then Purina Mills, outstanding fish food. I've had the pleasure and it's been a humbling experience to be able to have them say, hey, what do we need to create for you and the marketplace in pond management? And so they created the Aquamax line of fish foods that are outstanding fish foods. My favorite right now is MVP because it's got 9 different particle sizes, fish meal-based fish food. Some of the pellets float. Some of them slowly drift down in the water column so little bitty fish can feed on them. So I thank Purina Mills, Texas Hunter, and Easy Dock. Also, Outdoor Water Solutions is a sponsor. They have windmill aeration systems, solar-powered aeration systems. If you want to know more about Outdoor Water Solutions, you can go to their website or send me an email and I'll send you one of their flyers. I just got some of their updated flyers. So Frank James says, Bob, I've been advised that it's pretty safe to treat bushy pondweed that covers 25 to 30% of my pond despite summer temps and no aeration. Never had DO problems. Is there too much of a risk of a DO crash when the bushy pondweed dies? I'll tell you this, Frank. If you've got 25 to 30% coverage of the pond, then if you treat about 25% of that plant life, allow it to die over a period of 7 to 10 days, then treat another batch and allow it to die, you're safe. Because you can't, when you've got 25 to 30% coverage and you're treating a fraction of that, then what's probably going to happen, I hate the word probably, what I expect to happen is that when that bushy pondweed dies, it's going to decompose fairly quickly and release a bunch of its nutrients back in the water and help initiate a plankton bloom or feed an existing plankton bloom. So as long as you treat that in fourths or even thirds, you're going to be fine, even though it's 90-something degrees outside right now. Now, if you had 80% coverage, guys, I ain't telling you to go kill your vegetation if you got 80% coverage. Don't do that. But with what Frank's question is, my answer is pretty clear on that. Michael Isley, Danny Mac, the recent rain served up a thick bloom overnight, and with the sun, I was getting olive brown with air temps of 98. Given what I've already got this year in baby fish, I added dye. Looks good now. As long as your baby fish have built up some fat, you're going to be fine. And now what the dye does, when you have a plankton, now what Danny Mac has a small pond in a sort of an urban setting, and it's a focal point of visual beauty, and the fish are an added benefit. So Danny Mac's got a windmill, not a windmill, but a waterfall, and well, maybe he has a windmill, but he's got a waterfall. He keeps his water moving, and he really likes the clarity of the water because he likes to swim in it and let the bluegill nibble on his moles and stuff. Sorry, Danny. But where I'm going with that is with olive brown colors. If that's a bloom, which it might have been, when you add the dye, it's going to take that bloom out. What the dye does is it blocks out the UV rays of the sun from penetrating into the water to do the sun's job of fueling that plankton bloom. So by adding the dye, that stops that whole process. Water clarity increases, and depending on how much dye you use, it looks like the Tidy Bowl man's been swimming in it. So Harrison Davis pond had 83 inches of clarity, and it's a clear fish bowl. That's part of the reason that the water's not productive. One of the interesting things to me about productivity of water is, in today's world, everybody wants clear water. Well, one of the points I didn't make earlier about having a plankton bloom early in the springtime is not only does it supply food for the food chain at the very base of your food web, it also blocks the sunlight off the bottom to help prevent rooted aquatic plants from growing up in shallow water. So when you've got 83 inches of clarity, then your odds of growing some plants go up. And when you've got 83 inches of clarity, good gosh, that's 7 feet? That's 6.5, 7 feet. So 7, 12, 90, 84. That's 7 feet. That's 7 feet of clarity. That's a swimming pool. So keep in mind that for productive fishery, that's not productive at all. That water's sterile. It doesn't have the bloom that it needs to be able to grow the baby fish to feed the bigger fish. And that's probably another reason that the bass are 8 to 11 inches long in that pond, is because the water is so clear that it's functionally sterile for a fishery. Now, I don't know that I would go out and fertilize now because your spawns are over. You're not feeding that many baby fish. Now, you're in Georgia, you're going to get a couple of more bluegill spawns, but not until later on in the summer, until the fall. So if you wanted to add a bloom, in September or October, that could be functional. But don't fertilize if you have a lot of plants, because then you'll be fertilizing the plants. Kenny Backus was talking to me about fertilizing his lake. That's the lake I was talking about that Steve Alexander's been working with to see if they can put it into their program, like small waters fishing. And he added a little bit of fertilizer to that lake, which is, I don't think, 18 acres, 17 acres, something like that. And he's convinced he fed his coontail. What that means is he missed the timing. So timing is a big deal with all these things that you do to manage a pond. Chris Horsley, is it too late to add lime? No, it's not. Please comment on the effectiveness of liquid calcium carbonate. I've heard a lot of good. I have not used the liquid calcium carbonate, but I've heard a lot of good things about it. It is so condensed and so dense and so heavy. As long as you get it mixed into the water column, it can push that alkalinity up, and it's affordable. It costs a little bit more money than ag lime. Of course, I'm old school. I've used ag lime my entire professional career, and I like it because it's perpetual, it's slower dissolving, it lasts longer. When you put that liquid calcium carbonate in there, it goes in there immediately. Now, what it can do, it's pretty volatile, so it happens fast, but it can also be depleted fast. I had a guy talking to me the other day over, he lives in the Metroplex and has a place over in East Texas. He used that, had the alkalinity checked, and his alkalinity had gone from like 8 parts per million to 40 in one day. But then I told him, you need to check it again, because he said the watercolor changed. So he checked it again about a month later, and the alkalinity had dropped to 12. So what happened is he got a really fast response from that liquid calcium carbonate, but something took it up, which could have been plankton, it could have been plants, I don't know, because I didn't go look at it, which meant he needed to add some more. But the only thing I can tell you about it is I've heard some good things. I have not used it, but I've talked to the guys that have. Matt Rail, if you're still watching, you're a guru on liquid calcium carbonate. You might chime in with an answer there and pitch that out there so everybody knows. But I've heard nothing but good things about it. The only caveat that I've got is when you put it in, if something wants to consume it, it's going to consume it pretty fast, and your alkalinity can drop. Now, we've got an article, I think, 2 magazines ago talking about nanobubbles. Nanobubbles, there's devices that can take oxygen from the atmosphere, turn it into micro bubbles, and push it into water through a very fine film filter kind of a thing, and then inject it into the pond. Well, what happens when those nanobubbles go into the thermocline or the water below the thermocline? That oxygen is rapidly consumed by anything that needs it, and that's typically going to be by bacteria. So it's the same kind of concept there. When you're injecting nanobubbles, it'd be like if a college football team went to Luby's and there was no salads, no vegetables, and 10 steaks. Well, who's going to eat those? The first guy's there. But then what happens when the kitchen workers come and dump another bowl of steaks out there? They're going to eat it. Then another bowl. Then another bowl. Until you finally get them full. Well, that's what's going on with the nanobubbles, is there's so much there to consume them that the nanobubbles haven't been able to get ahead. So I don't know how much the liquid calcium carbonate it takes to get ahead. So I don't know that. Because when a pond is negative with its alkalinity, or it has 0 or a small amount, and you add it, things that want it are going to take it. So I don't know how much is enough, but there you go. I don't know if anybody else is going to explain it like that, but I did. Okay, Dean Griffith, not productive, too dang mossy, coontail moss everywhere. What's a good way to get rid of it? Well, Dean, it depends on where you are, and I'm going to tell you this. Coontail is notorious. Coontail is not rooted. Coontail migrates through the water column with currents and wind and wave action. So I've seen ponds actually 100% covered with coontail in the top 2.5 or 3 feet of water, where under 3 feet there is no vegetation. So depending on the time of the year, I think one of the and it depends on your pond. There's a number of ways to get rid of coontail. If you want to do it in the springtime and you don't have a lot of flushing, Fluoridone's a great choice. Sonar is one of the brand names. There's several brand names of Fluoridone. That's a great way. This time of year, if you want to take some of it out, I'd be looking at one of the herbicides. Go to Aquaplant. Look at the Aquaplant website at Texas A&M. There's another good plant website at the University of Florida. But if you go to Aquaplant, identify your plant, then look at the choices you've got, then you can come up with the best protocol. But what I would be looking at with coontail, and if Kelly Duffy were on here, he might give us a better idea, but what I'm going to tell you is I'm fond of Aquathol. I've used it many years. I know now I've got to tell you guys, I stopped killing moss about 15 years ago and delegated that to guys that worked for me. So at that point, I stopped paying attention to the newest, greatest, bestest new stuff. But I know this. I've used Aquathol for years, and it works really well. And it goes back now, if you're covered up with coontail, don't kill it all. If you do that, you're looking for trouble. Because when you kill it, it's not going to be the herbicide that kills it. It's going to be the plants taking up oxygen, decomposing and rotting, and going through the composting process that's going to kill the fish, because it's going to consume a lot of oxygen. Then you're in trouble. Jeff Thompson, can you have too many bluegill if your bass under 3 pounds are underweight? Bass over 3 pounds are weighing good. We're culling smaller bass under 2.5 pounds. You can have too many bluegill if they're the wrong size. So when you've got bass under 3 pounds that are underweight, it's very likely because they're overcrowded for the size food that they have. So you need to be able to produce the kinds of food that they've got. One of the ways you do that is to cull some bass and then drill in and zero in on what you need to do to produce more bluegills in that 3 to 4 inch size class, which could mean fertilization, could be aquatic plant management, it could be feeding the fish, it could be a supplemental stocking, could be threadfin shad. I don't know where you are, Jeff, but if you don't have threadfin shad, you ought to consider that. And, now, of course, threadfin shad, they're going to die at 42 degrees, so I don't want you guys in Nebraska stocking threadfin shad, then calling me in October telling me that your fish died. So what you need to do, anytime you see, now, here's something I was telling Kenny Backus yesterday. I told him that he said that he's culling bass 17 inches and under now. Well, and he said he's thinking he's going to move to 18-inch bass and under to be culling. I'm going to caution everybody against that. I don't like culling 18-inch bass unless we're selective and the bass you're taking are grossly underweight. Now, here's why. An 18-inch bass should weigh 3 1/4 pounds. Most of the time, I'm going to tell you 90% of the time, that 18-inch bass that weighs 3 1/4 is a female. Those are the ones that stand the best chance to grow to larger sizes. So if you're culling 18-inch bass, you're likely taking your junior varsity and pulling your biggest bass that would be there in 4 years or 3 years or whatever it would take in your pond. The other side of that equation, well, somebody says, what if it's a male? Well, how many 18-inch males have you seen? If you've got an 18-inch male that's that 1%, keep it, because it's got the genes for itself to be big. It can pass those genes on. So I am fundamentally opposed to culling 18-inch bass. Now, what makes me change my mind is if we look at these 18-inch bass and they're grossly underweight. Grossly meaning if they're under 85% relative weight, then yeah, you need to cull some because you didn't do a very damn good job of creating the food chain to grow them up bigger than that. So there's a kind of a balancing act that you got to pay attention to. If you're compelled to be culling 18-inch bass, that probably means that you've over-harvested small bass. You haven't added the right kind of forage fish to feed those bigger bass. So if that's the case, you need to tweak the way that you're managing your food chain so you're not culling the junior varsity. So let me go on down here. Coontail moss, Dean Griffith. Okay, we talked about that. Chuck Brinkman, the bass I stocked originally weren't feed trained but do eat feed. I was told that is not common, and more than likely the next generation will not eat the feed. I'm watching some small bass feed as we speak. Will they learn this behavior, or do you think it's due to offering 400 grower when they were young? Okay, 400 grower is a small pellet that's used on fingerling fish. So basically what Chuck is saying, Chuck has a feeding program. When he starts seeing small fish, he starts presenting tiny pellets of fish food. You're going to condition a small fraction of fish to eat that fish food. That's not going to be a big number. You know, and Chuck, if I remember right, your pond is like 1.5 acres or 2 acres. So if you get 10 bass to eat fish food out of 10,000, that's pretty good. You know, and with your steady, consistent feeding of quality fish foods, starting with 400, but also feeding bigger pellets to the bigger fish, you're going to get that feeding instinct. Now, one of the things that happens in a pond, when you've got 500 bluegill coming to the feeder every day 2 or 3 times to eat, all those other fish are watching that behavior. Now, it's Pavlov's dogs. You know, it as consistent and repetitive as you are, that's going to condition some other fish. So that's why a handful of small bass and other fish that don't eat fish food could be enticed to eat fish food. But you got to be persistent, consistent, steady with a good quality fish food. Jordan Roberts checking in from Montgomery, Alabama. Talked to Ray Scott today. Ray's from Montgomery, Alabama, and sometimes we see a couple of our buddies from Montgomery, Alabama. Matter of fact, Robbie Mays with American Sport Fish Hatcheries right out the door out here working on the electrofishing boat, trying to add a generator to it. So Brad Foltz says, here in southwest Missouri, I found sunfish that are not crappie but have a large mouth and vivid blue stripes. The Missouri State page says they're green ear. They're very aggressive and very fun to catch on light tackle. Well, what that could be are just green sunfish. Green sunfish have got yellow trimmed fins. Their mouth's pretty big. They're green. They do have vertical stripes. They get about as big as your hand. They're easy to catch. They are very aggressive. So it's Brad, I would bet you those are green sunfish. I bet you. There's Tim Stewart checking in. Tim got his Texas Hunter feeder today. Jacob West, what is the pond size that reaches a point where aerators are no longer effective? There is no pond size where aerators are not effective. There are pond sizes where aerators aren't feasible. You know, I'll tell you this. If the water's much deeper than about 20 feet, it's really hard to push high volumes of low-pressure air down a hose 25 feet underwater. So I'm going to tell you it's more about depth than it is size. I mean, you could aerate a 600-acre lake if you don't mind spending $200,000 on aeration and $300 a month on electricity. You know, so I'm going to tell you, really, I've seen ponds as big as 70 acres that are aerated in every place but the deepest water, and it's been effective. But it's expensive, you know. At the same time, most people, I'm going to give you a more direct answer, Jacob. I'm going to tell you 25 acres. Because when you've got a 25-acre lake, the primary reason to aerate it is to increase productivity, minimize the risk of a fish kill, because you're pushing that lake to be the best producing lake it can be. Well, 25 acres, that means you're going to have probably a $10,000 a year feed bill. That means you're going to have somebody pretty much full-time paying attention to water quality. That means that you're going to have a really active culling program where you're taking out 500 or 1,000 bass every year because you're pushing it to its limits. Most folks aren't going to take a 25-acre lake and push it to its limits. What they are going to do is nudge it toward its best. And its best is what it can produce under its own natural circumstances, with a nudge from fertility and feeding and a good harvest plan after a good stocking plan. There's my answer for that. I kind of like that answer. Nathan Lewicki says, I feed MVP now and have hundreds of 2-inch bluegill that hang out in the shallow water right in front of the Texas Hunter feeder. The pellets are still too big for them. What other size of feed can I mix with my MVP to better fit their smaller mouths? I'll tell you what you can do there, Kelly, or Nathan. If you want to, what I would do there is go get some Aquamax 400. Holy cow, you guys are answering these things before I get to it. I would go buy some Aquamax 400 and just, if you see those little bluegill there, hand feed them, or you can mix some of that with your MVP to increase the numbers, the volume of feed with little bitty pellets. So you can add some to it if you want. Or you can just feed them by hand. Let's see. Chris Horsley, my feeder's throwing food into 4 to 5 feet of water, 85 degrees. Should I move it to a deeper area? Not necessarily. Just feed them in the morning because the water temperature is going to be lower in the morning. Let's see here. Danny Mack just put in 100 aerators. You must have the wind blowing. No cost. Cost of no object. Otherwise, Jacob, I say if your lake can generate waves on the air. There you go. Yep, it's blowing in San Antonio. It's blowing right here on this Facebook page. Micah, would it be good to drive around my 3.5 acre pond and dump in ag lime with a front end loader? If it needs it, the answer is yes. Otherwise, it does no harm. So, Micah, if your alkalinity is under 40 parts per million, and specifically if it's under 20 parts per million, yeah, it would help to drive around your 3.5 acre pond and dump in some ag lime with a front end loader. Let's see here. Okay, here comes Steve Alexander. Use clipper or propeller for coontail. See, those are some of the new products I seen new to me. I don't know anything about. Active ingredient came off the patent, is now more affordable. Oh, okay. Okay, so that active ingredient is probably the same thing as in Aquathol. That makes sense. All right, so there you go. All right, boys, it's 7:26. This hour has flown by. Josh Jones says, is there a cost-effective way to control Nimby in a 50-acre lake? It's pretty rampant. Man, when you have Nimby, that is absolutely the worst algae you can possibly get, and there's a reason for it. And the reason that Nimby is there is because something happened to all the better algae for it to go away. So a lot of times if a lake is over-treated with herbicides, these resistant strains of plants can come in and take over. That's what Nimby does. Now, I don't know that there's a cost-effective way to control Nimby. And maybe Steve can chime in if Kelly Duffy's on here. Nimby is a tough nut to crack. So I don't know that there's a cost-effective way. There are some effective ways. One of them is to stop treating the native algae that compete with it. Let those go for a year. But there are some new treatments that I'm not aware of. Jordan Roberts, bring Robbie on the show. Robbie is covered in sweat. It's about 94 degrees. He's got the generator out from the electrofishing boat, replacing the stator on that thing. And if I brought him in here, he wouldn't be real happy. But oh, there he is, waving at us through the window. Okay, Josh Jones, Central Texas. Okay. Travis Paul Smith, great show. Hope family. Yep, the family's great. All right, we'll do this last one here. Scott Sumner, any evidence that grass carp may stunt the growth of largemouth bass? Absolutely not. Looking to possibly add some into a 5-acre pond for long-term vegetation control. Please speak to numbers relating to how many it takes for them to be effective. Okay, I'll tell you this, Scott. Grass carp will not stunt the growth of largemouth bass. Now, if aquatic plants are your primary habitat for small bait fish, and they eradicate that habitat and you don't replace it, then bass can overeat the food chain because the baby bluegills and other sunfish don't have a place to hide. So as long as you've got adequate habitat for the bait fish to be able to sequester and hide and escape being eaten, then your bass are not going to stunt. But if they can overeat their food chain because the bluegills are naked because their habitat got eaten, but it's not going to be because of the grass carp. Stocking rates, it depends on what kind of plant you've got. First of all, be sure it's a plant that they'll eat. You need to know that. And then secondly, I like to start with 3 per acre and make sure they're at least 12 inches long so they don't get eaten. And when you start with 3 per acre, if you're really serious about it, get a map, get out in a boat, and color in on the map where the plants are. And then stock 3 per acre, come back in about 8 months and do it again, map it again, and see if the volume of vegetation has changed. If it's increased, stock 2 or 3 more per acre. If it's decreased, leave them alone. But start with 3 per acre because once you stock them, you're going to have them for 14 or 15 years. Okay, folks, let's see here. Kim Moore, thanks for the compliment. Harrison Davis, pop it with dicot and copper. That's a pretty good idea as well. Josh Jones, love the show, thanks. Harrison Davis, seeing good results. You guys got it going on. So, hey, listen, once again, thanks for chiming in. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for spending time with me on this Wednesday. I deeply appreciate it. And for those of you that are looking for lake management consulting work, my email box has started to kind of get some input from folks that need some help. So if you need some help, I'm happy to do it. I don't mind assessing your situation. Just just as a convenience to you, but I do want to make a living doing that. So if there's ways I can help you design new lakes, help you figure out who can help you do what you need, help you design a management program, I'm all over that. So remember that. Email me. You can email me at boblusk@outlook.com or info@pondboss.com. Don't forget, pondboss.com, a great website, discussion forum, lots of articles. All these videos are archived. $35 a year, Pond Boss Magazine. It's a great investment. So until next Wednesday night, thanks for hanging out. Adios.